Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. When Rebecca spoke to me about coming and speaking today, I thought, that's so unusual. My upbringing in my life is so not diverse, all right? I couldn't have come from a more white and a more middle-class family. However, my home, where I grew up, was probably slightly different than others that were in the leafy green suburbs of the North Shore. So just to paint a picture, in the 60s and 70s, the North Shore was like a scene from Mad Men, the television series, right? Men mainly worked in corporate jobs. They wore white shirts, suits. The mothers didn't do paid work. So the mothers had visits by the Avon lady. The mothers used to do school tuck shop. The mothers used to be always there for the sports, when the sports events were on, and they were there to make the costumes for the school production. That was not my mother. So she was born in 1932. She had a university degree in the 1950s. She started teaching in the 60s, and she did a master's degree in English literature in the 70s. Now, she also ran, I've just lost my place here. She also ran the household of 3 kids, and she had a husband who felt that the fruit bowl and the fridge replenished themselves on their own, okay? Now, her mother ensured that she would be educated, and that meant my mother and my father ensured that my sister, my brother, and I would be educated or have some type of qualification that would give us independence. It would allow us to question the world in which we were living in. It also would give us choice. Now, I guess my awareness of that I was pretty fortunate. You know, I came from a safe, loving home. Probably started when I was about 13, and probably a realisation that not the whole world was like Pymble or the North Shore. And that started because my parents brought a holiday home on the Central Coast in what was then a little place called Patonga, which is sort of a fishing village. So Patonga's just on the mouth of the Hawkesbury River. And when I went there, there was a group of boys that were in that town. There were no girls in the town, there were just boys in the town, of course. So me and my friends created quite a lot of interest. But it was these boys who came from a parent or parents that were fishermen, worked in the local fish shop, worked in the local abattoir. And it was these boys that probably made me realise that probably I did, where I did come from, I was pretty fortunate. But it didn't mean that my life was any better than theirs. We just had different lives. And I guess my involvement with those boys over the years, they also taught me in some very crude and very unpleasant ways, with a lot of humour, that you just don't judge people, because everybody is different and everybody, you know, brings something to something. So it was also around that time that I started to develop a healthy questioning of authority and really understanding what was right and wrong. Now, that wasn't particularly difficult because I went to a girls' school where we had to wear blazers, we had to wear gloves, and we also had to wear mandatory, full brief green underpants, which was checked. Now, my, I guess, constant need to question authority meant I was in trouble a lot. And so that meant school wasn't terribly easy for me. But I think in hindsight, looking back on the school, as I say, being an all-girls school, it probably had a bit of a culture that meant women could actually make a difference. So that was a good, a good beginning of thinking that, well, yep, actually, and of course we're also talking about the beginning of the feminist movement. Now, I probably found my journey just after I finished school, was to become a town planner. And it was an area I moved into because it was an area that I thought that I could make a difference with environment, how places worked in the community, because I had a very strong environmental slant. At that point, I was riding a surfboard and I was very much interested in alternate lifestyles. So, but when I started uni and when I started work, it was very much a boy's world or a man's world. And when I started, my first job I'll tell you about in a minute was at Marrickville. They'd always come in, someone had come into the counter, usually a male developer, and they say, could we speak to a man, please? I don't know how many of you have had that experience, but I know it does still go on. Anyway, as a feisty 23-year-old who was a feminist, that really did get under my skin. So it was really about, we have to prove things are different. So, as I said, my first planning job was in Marrickville, and I was given the dirtiest strip in the LGA. So that was Marrickville Road to the river. And we are talking the 1980s here. And my goodness, starting that job and working that job really opened my eyes up to that life actually was very different from the North Shore. So I got in, and because when I was doing that job, you had to do everything. You had to do compliance, you had to do approvals, you did the whole lot. So my eyes were open to working conditions for sweatshops, for clothing manufacturing, completely dangerous places to work. Overcrowded homes, horrendous boarding houses, disgusting food premises, brothels, awful public housing and awful private rental housing. And there also were some pretty difficult businessmen you had to deal with. So it, as I say, it really raised my awareness, or there I understood the need for a safe place to live and a safe place to work. Now, at 24, like many people at that time, many of you, I headed to London, and I headed to London via LA and Spain on my own with no travel book or nothing to help me, and I must say it was pretty hard. Anyway, I arrived at London at that time. It was just post-Thatcher. There was high unemployment. There were limited social services available. The unions had been smashed, and there was a lot of poverty. It was also at the time when Eastern Europe was starting to readjust itself in relation to the fall of the Berlin Wall, and of course many of those countries rebelling against the communist regimes that had been in place. Now, I knew one person when I arrived in London, and she lived in a squat in Brixton. So I arrived at her place, the squat, which was an old orphanage. The funding had, of course, been cut by the Greater London Council. So it was this large place. I don't think there was a fridge. I think there was one little hot water system for the bathroom. But it was a place that was most of the time full of joy. So I lived there for 18 months with a crazy bunch of people. There was Serbians escaping Europe. There was one guy who was always stoned. There was a Swiss Balinese dancer. And there were musicians that were once famous. So if anybody knows a little bit about the indie music world in the 80s or late 70s, it was Per Ubu and Henry Cow were the once famous musicians that were living in this place. I also worked, I was the only one who had a job there, and I got a job in a club called the Groucho Club in Soho. Now, the Groucho Club was set up at that time for the film industry, for musicians, for artists, and for writers. So we always were serving people like Dawn French, Lenny Henry, Jennifer Saunders, Rhys-Jones, the Redgrave sisters, and John Malkovich. So they were sort of always constants in the club. And it was a fancy joint, right? It was a fancy joint. But then, of course, the contrast to outside that club was really an eye-opener. So I used to have to get the walk from the Soho to Trafalgar Square to get the night bus home at about 2 in the morning. And there were many a character and many experience that I had on that journey home. I used to always carry my penknife with the knife open just in case. Now, I was there for a while, and then I thought it's time to seek some adventure. Time to, did a bit of travelling in Europe, but I thought, well, seeking adventure, I joined a volunteer environmental group, and I headed to Africa. And the group was there to, at that time, the Tanzanian government were looking at setting up a marine national park off the coast of Tanzania. So I was with about 15 others, and we ended up on this island called Mafia Island, which is, if anyone knows, it's sort of just out from Dar es Salaam. And it was absolutely magic. So we lived there for about 5 months, and we were mapping the mangroves and the surrounding islands, and we were diving the reef and counting fish and looking at the reef, you know, living off fish and being part of the local community. And it was, as I say, it was absolutely beautiful. Then I sort of spent the next 8-9 months travelling, on and off, travelling Africa fairly extensively. So, and most of the time I was on my own. So I went to Kenya. I was in Kenya, Malawi, Zanzibar, Uganda, Zambia, Angola, Namibia, and ended up in South Africa. Now, there was a whole range of experiences that came with that, and there are a whole lot of stories that were there, but just a few things about the joys of being on a safari. We encountered desert elephants in Namibia, which are quite rare. I trekked in the Ruwenzori Mountains, which are in Uganda. As I say, swam in the most beautiful water. I dodged gunfire in the capital of Uganda. I experienced life in townships. In Angola, I came across a really awful group of game hunters that were. They had to help me because my passport had been taken. I negotiated a 16-year-old that was pointing his AK-47 at me, and then, of course, the last bit was ending up in hospital with malaria, which was an experience in itself. Now, I think it's probably at this stage in my life, so I'm about 26, that I grew up. I started to understand the struggles in the world. I understood also the joys of life. But it was also at that time where it was, what can I do to make a difference? And that in any way it was, okay, I've come from this background, I've got this experience, what can I do to make a difference? So then I returned to England after being away for a number of months, and I moved from Brixton to Oxford. And I did a master's degree in town planning at Oxford Poly. So the Poly's different to the university. The Poly does the technical stuff, the university does the classics. And I guess it's here that my interest in affordable housing started, because, and of course, I then took the work I did doing my course, and then I did a dissertation. My master's thesis was relating to how the UK deliver affordable housing through the local government sector. So I returned to Australia in 92, or late 92, early 93, and I got this great job as the Affordable Housing Officer at Waverley Council. Now, this was just before Bondi started to transform. It was at the time that they fixed up the poo problem in the water because they put the sewer outlet in. It was also at the time where, just before the transformation had happened. So there were these, Bondi was this strong community, many of which were Jews that had come out here after the Second World War. So it was seeing how that place was going to start to change as Bondi started to become beautiful. So there was a lot, at that time, so there was a fair bit of housing stress. So with strong political will, there was a councillor and one of the mayor, a woman named Barbara Armitage. There was a strong housing association in the area. At the time, the state government was fairly generous with grants around provision of housing and social housing, and there was a strong passion. And so we did make a difference. So in the 6 or 7 years I was there, we bought housing for people who were living with HIV and AIDS. We bought housing for women escaping domestic violence, people with disabilities so their carers could live there as well, and housing for low-income earners. It was also at the time when we started a program to see if we could get the development sector to start to provide affordable housing. And I think when I left, there was something like 7 or 8 houses that were units that we had secured for the affordable housing program. Sort of by the mid-1980s, you know, I'd been working in affordable housing for affordable housing for some time. It was time for me to move and expand, to start to look at that planning in a more broader context. It was also at that time that I started to work in leadership roles, and I started in botany, in Ryde, and now here at Georges River. Now, I wouldn't consider myself to be a leader, and I had to develop my own leadership style. And I think that was through experiencing some of the great managers I had, also through my own personal growth. Now, And I guess through this, I started to develop the key things that I think are important in leadership. And they're things like the things that I think are important, and how I do my job is listening. Really knowing that you are there to serve your staff, because you cannot do your job without your staff. So you need to have them resourced, understand their role, and ensure they have the information they need to do the work they do. You're also dealing with conflict, dealing with it quickly, understand the issue before you react, be stable, be equitable, take responsibility, and of course say sorry when you're wrong. Okay? Now, I have always loved my job ever since I was, my first job at Marrickville, and I still do today. I love my job, but the journey hasn't been always easy. The workloads are big, and there's many a time that I'm up in the middle of the night. I've gone to bed, got up, done a bit of work, gone back to bed, woken up, come to work, just so you can, because it's playing on your mind and the load is there. It also, especially in leadership roles, you're competing with men. And men often have a different way of presenting than a woman when you're going for these bigger, more management roles. People can also be aggressive. It can be hard work. I know plenty of you at the counters and the planners, it can be hard work, and the regulators, hard work when you're out there and you get hit. You're scrutinised for the decisions you make. And now it's worse because you're scrutinised and criticised on public media, on the social media platforms. That's hard, that can be hard. And of course, there's balancing home and life, balancing work and home, and, the washing out in the middle of the night, or, leaving work to take the guinea pigs to the vet. They're all the things, or, being there to do the assignments for your kids. It is hard. But also the last thing is, of course, for my own self, things can be a little bit challenged because I do have a fairly quirky style. And I can be a bit excitable. So I know it can be a challenge because I'm neither corporate nor a public servant. So I think that can be difficult for me, and it can be difficult for others. And I do have to thank Gail for giving me the opportunity to work in this role. So just in finishing, I think it's always nice to keep a little bit of adventure in your soul and a little bit of passion, because I think that helps in how we exist and how we function in the world. So thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you, Meryl, for that story. This brings us to our Q&A portion now. So Meryl will take any questions from the audience. Well, 2 questions from the audience now.
Oh, any questions?
Hey, my name is Kamer. I work as Web and Internet Officer in IMT. As you know, Australia is one of the most diverse countries, attracting skilled workforce, and people are coming to this country to really take the opportunity. Besides, naturally and understandably, there will be some conflicts when they enter the workforce because of the locals and them different cultures. They will have some conflicts. What would you advise a young person who is dealing with this kind of conflicts when they enter the workforce, and what would be the best for them as an advice or suggestion?
So if I'm just going to say that back to you, is about being comfortable with where they've come from. Is that right? Or in dealing with conflict. Is that, if I've got that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that hopefully this might, and I'm very conscious about who I am to answer this question, and often it can be a little trite. So I think it's probably that understanding, looking and having pride and understanding of where you come from, and that could be, and who you are. And that could be anything from the place you live to your family, the beauty of your neighbourhood, the people you know, and then the experiences you've had, and then taking that and how you would then use those elements in your attitudes and how you present yourself to the world. And as I say, it sounds a bit trite what I'm trying to say, but it's a really hard question to answer, but it's actually knowing and having that pride of not only who you are, but where you have come from, you know, and not sure if that's quite the right answer. But
probably doesn't have an exact answer, but yeah, it should be all right, I think.
Oh, right.
It's like, you know.
Maybe you could answer it for
I'm
me.
looking for that answer.
Hi, Meryl. I'm Kath. I'm on the D&I committee. My question is, you mentioned a few career roadblocks that were around your gender, and I would love to know if there's a particular one tip you could give anyone that feels like they're experiencing a bit of a roadblock based on their gender and how to navigate it.
Okay. The one, I will talk about confidence. All right, and I'll use it in my own experience. There's two things that have undermined me through my career. The first one was report writing and letter writing, because there's a particular way, as you will know, to how you work in local government. That's the first one, is how to make sure that if there's something that's blocking you, you work hard to try and address that. The way I used to do it, this is when I first got a job, I used to take my letters to my father, who ran an engineering company in 5 Dock at lunchtime, for him to check my letters for me, so the manager wouldn't red pen them for me. So that's the first one, is about if there is something there and you know it's blocking you, you need to sort of understand that and do things to correct it. The other thing is about confidence. And to this day, report writing is an issue for me, as my staff will tell you, but to this day, I will not go into any meeting, whether it's with a staff member or with a developer, member of the community, not being prepared. So that means I understand the background, I understand the issues we're dealing with on the day, and then I have a way forward. And there's a reason why we're the reason why we're going to go down that path. And that is because that's what gives me confidence, because if I'm challenged on something, I can then go, well, either I understand it or I don't understand the issue, but I have confidence in how I'm presenting myself to whether it's a developer or as a member of the community. Also, when you have that knowledge about on the issue you're going into, and someone is giving you a hard time, you can actually stop them and go, well, let's take a breath and let's start again, because I don't think you're hearing me. So you've got all that ammunition to be able to do that.
Does anyone have any other questions of Meryl?
Oh.
Hello, Meryl.
Hello there.
I would like to know who have been your role models in your life, just one or two.
No, I've got a few. I've got a few, actually.
Am I one?
Roxanne Thornton, number one. Look, I have got... Yeah, I do, actually. Probably a guy named George Brummis at Waverley Council. He had a particular style and management style of talking to the community. Sue Weatherly is one of them. And Sue Weatherly is one of them in relation to dealing with the development sector and probably presenting. Dominic Johnson is one of them in relation to how you present to the community and to council and dealing with issues. And of course there's Gail. And I didn't have to say that, but I did. No, she has too, again, in how you weigh up, how you get your message across in such a politically hot environment. So I'm learning all the time from that, I think. I mean, there's people from the private sector as well. I think, there's Adam Seaton's one of them. He's the lawyer on our LPP chair. Couple of, probably they're the